think he likes he better like the John Deeres, right?
Yeah.
Except it'd be pretty cold sleeping outside if you went like a John Deere, right?
When she was about second grade and they'd taken a spelling test, and the teacher, one of the spelling words was deer, and instead of D-E-E-R, she spelled it D-E-E-R-E like John Deere, because on our farm, she'd seen that word deer, and that's the only deer she ever really associated with. And so we went back and corrected it with the teacher the next day with a John Deere brochure, and she said, this is how it's spelled here, and this is the right way. And the teacher marked it correct, and she got 100% on her test.
See, that there is badly worn.
Makes it sound good when it's running.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like it'd be knocking.
Clatter would go with it, huh?
Yeah.
You're 80 years old and you're wore out too.
Yes.
Since 1918, the green fields of America have been tended to by farmers driving green tractors, bearing the name of an American agricultural institution, John Deere. While some may prefer the red of that other breed of tractor, for many, only a Deere will do. Often, it's a matter of keeping up a tradition, a commitment to a faithful family friend that's been passed from generation to generation. Among those who bleed green, there are many who have developed a deep and abiding affection for the pop, pop, pop of the two-cylinder John Deere tractors that were the mainstay of the company from before the Depression until 1960, when the company switched to 4- and 6-cylinder engines. A whole culture of collection and restoration of these classic farming machines has developed. This, coupled with a sense of family connection these folks have with their John Deeres, has led to an increase in both popularity and value for these sturdy tractors.
Probably in 1937, a John Deere new probably sold for $800 or $900, and it might come out here today, and a tractor like that might, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how it was equipped, and round spoke wheels and the kind of a paint job it would have, and things like that. There was an auction up in Minnesota where a man, his wife had died, and he had a quite extensive John Deere collection, and he, with his age, he decided he was going to sell it. And they said that his sale amounted to about $1,800,000, so that's a pretty awesome sale. He'd been collecting, and years back, you could go to a sale and buy an old two-cylinder tractor for $100 or $150, and maybe in the 60s, but now there's a big demand. They're not making any more of these old tractors, and they scrap them out and they're parting them out, and a lot of times people have one that's been in the family, and maybe they've had that tractor for a couple, 3 generations, belonged to their grandfather, and they don't want to sell it. I talked to a guy yesterday, and he was telling me about a lady that her father had died and left her this old tractor, and it was a good running condition, and she was going to put it in her flower bed as a lawn ornament, and he said, oh, no, you can't do that, and do that to a tractor. Like, let me get you another one that's older one, that's junker one. He said, no, she said, you can't do that. I got to have this particular tractor. So it meant a lot, maybe it was the first tractor she learned how to drive as a little girl or a little boy, and they just part of the family,
The organization dedicated to these classic tractors is the Two-Cylinder Club, named for the stalwart John Deere power plant. Boasting more than 20,000 members from all 50 states and 20 foreign countries, the club's annual expo is the place to be for lovers of classic John Deere tractors.
We've always had John Deeres, always had the Johnny Pop around. We've had some other colors on the farm, but they they never stuck around much. The green and yellow stuck around. People will look, no doubt about it. You can go down the street in a Corvette, yeah, that's cool. But anybody can get a Corvette. Not anybody can have a 2-banger John Deere. Everybody will look. And they do. I've drove my tractor around town before and like, ooh, look at that. They're not around, and I still farm with them. I loaded corn on a semi with John Deere 620, 1958, I believe it is. They still do their job. There aren't many 1958 vintage of anything that'll do a job anymore. But yeah, they can be a chick magnet.
Two-cylinder 16, held in Amana, Iowa, had 407 exhibits displaying 350 tractors. Visitors from as far away as the Netherlands, Australia, and South Africa came to admire classic John Deeres, enjoy the Iowa scenery, and spend time with friends. People like John Miller, who brought his 5 unstyled John Deere Model A tractors to show off to the crowd. His collection includes a Model A from every year they were produced, from 1934 through 1938.
I'm John Miller. I'm from Muscatine, Iowa. I brought 5 unstyled A's to the two-cylinder expo, and just here enjoying people. Meet my friends once a year, come to the show, a lot of fun. This is a 1934 Model A. This was a first 180 built. Deere made several changes on them. The tractor wasn't built heavy enough. It needed to be built up, redone. And there's a lot of changes. I've had this tractor 7 years. It took me 7 years to find all the parts to put this together. And finally finished it this year. This is my pride and joy. I've got a pile of hours in it, but it makes it all worth it when you can come to a show like this and show it off. The next one is, this is 35A. Several different changes on this. The frame is thicker. Each one of these have different style front wheels on them. During the unstyled A's, they had 5 different wheels. It's fun to be able to show them each option that they had in those 5 years. This next one is a 1936 A. This was one of my dad's tractors. I ran this tractor when I was little. My grandpa used to drive this one. It sat out behind the barn for years until I went to my first expo in Waterloo. And I was waiting for the junk man to come and get these old tractors. And after the first expo I went to, I made up my mind that I wanted one of them bad. So that was the beginning of the end. It was a rusty mess out behind the barn, and we drug it in stock, and tires rotted off of it, and found different wheels for it, and of course all new tires, and overhauled the engine, and I tried to get everything as original as I can back to the way it was when it came out of the factory. This is a 1938 A. This was also one of my dad's tractors. I drove it when I was a little kid. This tractor has a Balin overdrive on it. It was an add-on. I can show you on the other side of this. This is a add-on. The tractor only had 4 gears forward, but if you wanted to go faster down the road, you added on this piece here, and then you'd put this, you keep your main transmission in neutral and put this into overdrive. That'd be 5th gear on the low side, and then you push this over on this side and make it the high side. That'd make 6th gear. But that was real unique in its time because of Dad got lots of jobs helping the neighbors haul in corn in the fall because his tractor went up the road so much faster than everybody else's. So when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to run this tractor, and overdrive. I had to leave it in fourth gear, so I used to ride in the back hopper of the picker on the way home at night. I'd ride in the wagons, but when he'd go up the road, he wouldn't let me ride in the wagon. He was afraid it'd come unhooked, so I'd ride in the hopper of the picker. That was pretty big stuff back then. So this is 1937A. This came from, it was shipped new to Nebraska. Up until 37, they had a loop drawbar, a plow drawbar on the back of them. I can show you the difference in them. It's got a big loop in it. Now, as you go on newer, it just goes to a regular drawbar. They put oil gauges on them. By this time, 34 and 5 didn't have any oil gauges, they just had a pin. This is another option wheel that is adjusts two different ways. That's the hardest set of wheels to find. They're the option wheels. Those wheels would probably be $1,500 to $2,000 for the rims alone. That's the front ones. The back ones are usually $2,000 a set. So it gets awful expensive after a while.
For those with the money to spend and a need for parts, the expo is the place to be. In addition to a huge swap meet that is limited to John Deere items only, each year there is an auction, which for many is the highlight of the event. Between the two, you can purchase anything from the smallest shim or bushing to a whole tractor ready to roll. And there were some really good deals. At least we think so. Restoring John Deere tractors can be a pricey undertaking, but the results are well worth the expense and effort. For those who choose to bring one or more of these machines back to life, there is a sense of preserving not just a tractor, but a part of American culture and history. In the 19th century, as America expanded westward into the Great Plains, there were 400 million fertile acres of land to be turned into farms, hundreds of thousands of square miles to be plowed and planted. Among the suppliers of plows and other farm equipment to these pioneers was a company founded by an industrious blacksmith named John Deere. At first, growth on the plains was slow and steady, and the primary source of horsepower was horsepower, with the occasional mule thrown in here and there. World War I changed everything. With the thousands of men headed off to war, there was a huge increase in demand and sudden lack of manpower to do the job. Those who were left couldn't afford the low speed of draw animals, nor the acres required to grow the grain to feed them. The answer was the tractor. Everyone seemed to get into the tractor business. By 1920, there were more than 180 companies producing tractors, with John Deere sitting solidly among the top 5. Competition was stiff, however, with Henry Ford undercutting everyone with his mass-produced Fordson tractor. In time, though, American farmers would learn that quality and reliability were worth the extra money. And though it would take decades, John Deere would eventually become the best-selling tractor in the country. Many Deere enthusiasts boast more than an encyclopedic knowledge of the machinery. They have an interest in the history of the company as well. One of the most obscure chapters in that history was represented at 2-cylinder 16 in the form of these two odd-looking contraptions. These reproductions of the John Deere Model A and A2 tractor tanks, seen here for the first time, were painstakingly reproduced by a small but dedicated group of Iowa residents. They are reproductions rather than restorations. Only one of each was ever built by the company, and neither survived the scrap heap.
Most of the original pictures did not have the guns in them.
Not only had the original vehicles been destroyed, there were no blueprints, plans, schematics, or any other design records available to work from. There were just a handful of pictures and test results from the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Grounds. You might get the feeling that the company did not consider this project a highlight in John Deere history, and the Aberdeen test results would support that theory.
It was a fiasco. It weighed too much. The visibility was horrible. You couldn't see straight ahead on the ground unless you're 60 feet in front of you. The machine gunners, you can imagine shooting a machine gun inside a steel box. You couldn't have enough ear protection to stop you from going deaf. The driver would drive it in his very stiff suspension. He would knock himself out, he'd get hit. The gunners, when they would look out their sight, they would look through like a 1-inch diameter pipe to shoot, which is, not very practical. The steel lugs on the tire, in theory, worked very good because in theory, it was supposed to get you out of mud and sand and things like that. However, what happened was because of the tricycle and narrow front end, if you got in mud and sand, you couldn't get out because of that. The tires, the machine guns did shoot out the back tires, which is not a good idea. It was also deafening to the driver of the tank when he was shooting the machine guns. They actually shot 550 rounds, and that was it. And the gunners, when they'd shoot it, the shells would fall on the gunners, burn them. So then they cut holes in the bottom of the turrets to alleviate that problem. Then the mud would fly up and get them all wet.
The tractor tank was the brainchild of John Deere president and World War I veteran C.D. Wyman.
Charles Wyman, who was a grandson of the original John Deere, had the idea that in 1940-41 John Deere should get into armament production. There was a need for it. If you remember the history, 1939, Hitler was going wild in Germany. So John Deere wanted to be part of the plan. We had fewer armaments. The first unit, what we call Army A1, was tested at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Aberdeen's in Maryland by the Army, had a number of defects, and corrections were recommended that if this unit was to be produced, things should be done differently. And thus, Deere began working on Armored Unit 2. Army Unit 2 had a wide front end. It was built to be more stable, correct one of the defects. You could turn it better on loose sand and mud. It also has a lower profile. It was built to be a little lighter. There's no steel wheels on the back of it. Allegedly, the plans we got, it was supposed to be produced with bulletproof tires. Now, I don't know what that would have been in 1941. It's equipped with the same armaments, in this case, two 30 caliber Browning machine guns. It had some internal things, had a little increased horsepower.
We wondered about the reasons for wanting to reproduce these obscure tractor tank hybrids.
The reason for building it is not only I'm a John Deere enthusiast, but I was in the military service in the Marines from 1966 to 69. And one of the armaments of the pre-World War II tank is a 30 caliber machine gun. And in Vietnam, where I was stationed part of the time, I did fire a machine gun 30 caliber. So I knew a lot about the armament, and this really interested me from that standpoint.
The emphasis was always on both military and mechanical authenticity.
Brian Anderson, who was really the brains behind Army 1, is a good friend of mine, wanted to build the two units together because that's all that existed, were two units. And he said, well, I asked him, what are we going to do for machine guns? And he says, oh, we'll get replicas. They make replicas like they do in California for movies and that. I said, no, I want real machine guns. If we're going to do it, I want it as authentic as possible, like the real thing. And these have Browning machine guns. I didn't think you could get them. 36 hours later, he called me, says, I got them.
Still, the challenges in recreating these vehicles were enormous.
I'd say the biggest challenge probably was the hydraulic systems. The thickness of the steel was in the original directions that we had, the report, was anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/8 to 3/16. And to make the tractor as light as possible, we used mainly 3/16 inch steel and a little bit of 3/8 inch steel. Just the turrets alone on this weighed 675 pounds. So, and then with no directions on how to build it, it was really a challenge. To get the hydraulics to work correctly under a 1940 tractor is very difficult.
We were able to take parts from other antique John Deeres and put them together, but basically it was made from scratch. But I think one of the key things is that cone at the top. Dr. Clark, do you want to point that out? Because if you look at that, that is made from scratch and has several angles on it. It's got bearings up in there. You know, it has to sit on that platform. It's got several different angles and bolted on, but that took a lot of work, I know that.
Really, just that little cone.
That little cone. And then the key to the whole thing, really, Dr. Clark, show that under there, is this beam. Just looks like a piece of steel, but in there are 126 parts that make these turrets rotate. There's a hydraulic cylinder, hydraulic hoses, electrical connections, a roller chain device that's all measured so that these will turn exactly 180 degrees. And we can adjust the speed of them. They rotate from front to back. The original data said 10 seconds, so we have them set. It takes 10 seconds to go from pointing back to front. I should mention another key thing about this unit, the back tires are lower.
Which of course made it impossible for the 30 caliber machine guns to shoot holes in them. However, despite this and all the other improvements, the Army didn't even bother to test Model A2. And it became apparent that they felt tractors were better suited for bean fields than battlefields. Instead, John Deere factories produced ammunition, aircraft parts, and other items essential to the war effort. But perhaps its most vital contribution was made where it's always been made, in the fields and on the farms of America and other countries around the world, helping farmers produce cotton and corn, wheat and potatoes, and whatever else might be needed to feed and clothe a thriving nation. It is this legacy that the collectors of two-cylinder John Deere seek to preserve. A legacy that, like the tractors themselves, seems destined to carry on for as long as people use machines to work the land.